What are angels and demons really?
Words from your mythology. They are non-physical entities. You're aware of once you reach the non-physical dimensions, they are still beings, but they're not necessarily light or dark anymore. There's no good and evil in the non-physical. Many of you spiritual people or whatever consider them such think that the non-physical is all light and they're only angelic beings and demons need to be in lower dimensions. That's just an interpretation of frequency. In reality, in higher non-physical dimensions, there is neither demons nor angels. It's just words you're using for non-physical beings, depending how you feel about them.
So are they in the seventh dimension and higher?
From what I understand, what you're seeing as such, yes.
Okay.
I'm, as you're aware, in some of the sixth dimension, and we already experience much less of a degree of good and evil. It is all more irrelevant, or rather relevant, depends who you're talking to. But because the relevancy is becomes irrelevant. And very much so, a lot of things you consider a conflict down there seems like a contradiction up here. And down there, up here, is not necessarily hierarchy in terms of betterment, it's just more compressed, perhaps. There's less venturing off, less fast spread out. Therefore, for example, I can communicate with beings such as the reptiles, while those that hold those frequencies you perhaps consider lighter or darker cannot coexist in lower dimensionality. So even in my dimension, there's very little distance between what you call good and evil. We would not even use those concepts here because they make no more sense. However, in a non-physical, from what I'm aware of, they're virtually non-existent. There's just energy, no more good and evil or light or dark. Therefore, also demons and angels are just words.
Okay. Who was Lucifer?
Lucifer was not necessarily something, it's more like a principle or a being, if you wish, which again you consider a demon or an angel. I'm not sure whether David has been interested in this particular concept for a longer period of time, much more before he reached out to beings as me or the reptiles or any of us here. But mostly it is something perhaps that represents to a very large degree the non-difference or the difference between angelic or demonic beings, depending on how you see it. That this being is considered the light bringer. The reptiles, I believe, have perhaps a better understanding of this concept from where they're coming from. But light and the dark, they've used the metaphor numerous times, so I'm just sharing from them right now. Is the idea of a light house that's only needed in darkness, as you're aware, for example, that would be the principle of Lucifer. It also has been used for many what you consider perhaps pagan societies before the advent of Christianity, particularly in the European region, but there were other examples of such names for such entities in other cultures. For example, in Persian mythology, to some degree, there was also the duality and the non-duality, certainly in ancient Egypt. However, it is in the modern world that very often this being has been equivalent with Satan, which is not really the same principle, it's a much different entity. It is more of a being that is somewhat a reflection of what you have also been considering the archangel.
Okay.
I'm looking for the correct term. Again, those beings of demonic or angelic nature are just your interpretation. There was a certain conflict between people, that were literal people, that were also overlapping in the actual angelic or demonic, whatever you want to call them, realms. Because many times in history, people from Earth were being taught information quite physically from people that landed on your world and they misunderstood them completely. And now your mythology is based to a large degree on this understanding and trying to decipher here. A certain person who became known as Archangel aren't quite. It could be Michael, from what I'm aware of, but again, those are just words that you have from your own mythology. But in many ways, there was the war of the gods, and in the Greek mythology, for example, you have Prometheus, and in the Germanic mythology, you have Loki, and literally many other of those older cultures before your modern religion ideas. There were similar aspects. I believe the person of Faust from the vessels on modern culture, from a poet that's just a few hundred years ago, represented the same principle. And it is to a large degree based also on ancient. One being you're perhaps more aware of is the Enki person from Sumer, since many people in modern spiritual community are more interested in Sumerian culture than any of the others, but ultimately they were all talking about the same people. So the person that brought fire to humans, in many ways that's a metaphor. So it wasn't necessarily their idea that people didn't understand fire and they need to attribute it to a certain god. It's more that they were given knowledge and that's being represented for such because they already had much more than fire before they were falling back in those primitive ages. And also the idea of creating humans and the idea of perhaps the Luciferian rebellion against creation itself. In a way, it's a part of creation. But again, it's difficult to explain in a language that has been defined for people who don't understand or who do believe in a duality and don't understand the unity of those different aspects. You can consider lighter or darker, but ultimately the Luciferian Rebellion, or whatever you wish to call it, is a part of God itself. It is impossible that there is an eternal being that is one with everything, but not with evil. That is a gross misunderstanding. Ultimately, when you reach high enough, the God and the devil, so to speak, are one and the same thing, and that's one of the aspects that has been represented in Lucifer. And even more modern author has, I believe, researched and coined the phrase of Abraxas, I believe, which is a much older god, but the principle right there is again the same god devil, so to speak. As is the principle has been represented in all of those mischievous, apparently, entities in all of those different cultures, or Ahura Mazda, for example, the Persian.
Okay.
It's a two-faced god. There's also some references to that in many of your modern culture that you're not aware of. In the theater culture, for example, you have a smiling and a crying masks. Of course, they are just meant to represent either the dramaturgic play in the theater dates back to ancient Greece, or a comedy, but ultimately there was much more entertainment behind the symbology originally.
Okay.
The sun and the moon also represented those aspects in many older cultures due to the lunar and the solar aspects in your masculine and feminine nature. You have been taught dualistic principles throughout your history, and this particular principle is perhaps something that can help you understand the non-duality of duality. But again, your English language fails me here to represent this efficiently. Again, that's another thing you will easily understand once you've transitioned yourself to higher dimensionality. And then those things that I explained, it can be kicked out from your subconscious mind already. But your ego might have trouble interpreting it, fitting it into any box or concept your ego mind is aware of currently.
Okay. What was the Luciferian Rebellion, and what did it have to do with early humans on Earth?
Well, there's also details what you earlier asked considering who what gods are. Like most of those came from Enki, right? Mostly was how planet Earth was to be governed. It was their idea should planet Earth be governed by this particular extraterrestrial group or another one? Should humans be given more power or less power? Should they even survive or should they get wiped out? Most arguments was about the human experiment. So this is one of the arguments that there was between the civilizations. Mostly it was about the rebellion considering what humans were allowed to know about who and what they are.
Okay.
Sexuality also played a large role.
What do you mean? In what way?
Who was allowed to reproduce with whom and what setting and to what degree.
Okay. what did Metax mean about the Luciferian Rebellion being a rebellion against creation itself?
Well, this goes much further than what you had on Earth. And that is more considering the idea, yes, of functionalities between light and dark in the cosmos. Or we don't find words in your so-called English language to exemplify this sufficiently, so we'll just go very general terms. The idea of non-creation, the idea of nothingness. Obviously, in this case, would simply be the eradication of humanity. Or if you get philosophical in this idea, again, you might consider Top for it, who's more skilled perhaps in such measurements, or their species, the birdies, right? The idea of nothingness being the same thing as the source, literally. Everything building its polar opposite. So a rebellion against creation itself would be the inversion of creation, therefore a contradiction in itself, but a contradiction in itself would annihilate itself by itself and therefore become everything that it is not at the same time. Again, we don't have words especially to describe this, is the best way you can put it.
Okay. So did this whole rebellion actually involve physical battles on Earth between the forces loyal to Enki and the forces loyal to Enlil?
Of course, yes.
So, I mean, what were these battles like? Was it anything like depicted in our science fiction movies, like people shooting guns at each other and ships attacking each other and things like that?
In space, yes, but very often human armies also marched against each other, which you also can find in mythology. Mostly Greek, of course, but also others, where gods simply employed their armies and sent them into battle against each other. And when you also choose a certain people to fight for their cause, another god chose another people to fight for their cause, and they didn't go with each other, like playing chess.
Right. So how long ago did the Luciferian Rebellion happen in terms of its overlap with Earth's history?
Well, if you asked me a question earlier referring to the he can answer, right? That's timeless, or if you're referring to what the choir you're hearing right now, likely between the gods and the your brothers, that was likely during Atlantean times.
Okay.
So, over 12,000 years ago, or there were obviously skirmishes and battles after that that were a remnant of such in some way as never ended.
Okay. Did any of it take place on Earth before the pole shift, like in Hyperborea or Antarctica?
There were already conflicts, right?
Okay.
Mostly disagreements. Of course, there is the idea of the person being chained down to the earth, right?
Okay.
The Lucifer.
Okay.
Or Loki, for example, right?
Right. So did Lucifer or Loki ever have a physical human body, or was he always in the non-physical?
Yes. There was a physical incarnation.
Okay.
Again, if you're talking about the principle in general, but the person that the principle was attributed to, again, your history has been rare many times. It's not just the Christians, Muslims, the Jews that rewrote history, or the Buddhists. Your older pagan religions also often copied from each other and added new meaning to an original physical event and mixed it with spiritual teachings, etc., etc.
So what race was he? Was he human?
Yes, most of those created gods were humanoid in nature, as they created you in their own image. That's one of the parts in your Bible that's probably still correct. As you remember, likely in the original version, it's plural.
Okay. I might have misunderstood you. Did you say Lucifer was more blue?
Plural?
I might have misunderstood you. What race was Lucifer? Like, was he white, black, or blue?
Yes, humanoid, right? Racially speaking, among the human species, like the more white nature,
Okay.
similar to the northern population of Atlantis.
Okay. What dimension was he in whenever he first appeared on Earth?
Well, that's the thing. Appearing often relates appearing to your species, and appearing to your species likely trickling down to the source of fourth dimension or to be visible to you. Although he could reappear or disappear into higher dimensions whenever he chooses.
Okay.
So when he appeared on Earth, he would have been sort of fourth dimension or to even appear to people back there at all.
So what is his main dimension currently? Is he in a non-physical dimension, like 7 or above?
From what we're aware, he is physical, right? But the principle that he represented obviously a non-physical principle.
Okay.
And you can consider a demon or a non-physical entity, whatever.
Okay. So, has he always been both light and dark at the same time?
Again, that's a principle that's been attributed to him due to his twin nature, so to speak, in your history. Now, the principle itself is the same principle as a praxis, as been formulated by one of your more modern philosophers, right?
Right.
However, the person himself has obviously had a certain function, and if you can divide it good and evil, depends what perspective you look from. You would like to consider an evil if you're looking from Enlil's perspective, right?
Okay.
Or on the other hand, you consider him pure light if you're looking from his perspective.
Okay. Now, Mitak said Lucifer is somewhat a reflection of a certain archangel. Do you know which particular archangel he is? Is it Michael?
Well, as a reflection, yes. As an opponent, that's in one way you're fighting for the same cause, because when you get the non-physical again, things look much differently. You're mixing up philosophical concepts here, as very common in your more modern religion, with simple people that have two arms and legs and walk your planet.
Okay. So who was Archangel Michael? Is that just a fictional character that was created later, which was really Lucifer, or was it a totally separate person that really existed?
A separate person that really existed, but obviously much has been attributed to him, and some things have been taken away, etc., etc.
Okay. Who was Prometheus, and how is he connected to Lucifer?
Like the same person.
Okay. So does Lucifer have any connections at all to Satan?
Again, another word for another person, or many times words in your language have been changed and they got mixed up, and God projected a certain label on the other one, etc., and sometimes it has been used for different people, right?
Right.
That's what we referred to earlier when you talked about the few different pantheons of Sumer and Egypt.
Okay. Now, I know the idea of giving fire to humans is a metaphor for giving knowledge to humans, but what did this have to do with the Luciferian Rebellion?
Well, that was the idea of the Yankee person earlier. We already touched upon that. The idea was given too much information to humans, for example, again, they are in the for protection, right? There was also a metaphor. The original sin, right? It wasn't because sex is evil, because it is dirty things. It was more the idea that humans were then reproducing and messing up the experiment, right?
Okay.
It was not supposed to happen.
Okay. A few sessions back, we were talking about Lucifer, and I had asked if he had any connections at all to Satan, and you mentioned that, basically you mentioned that Satan is another word for another person, and many times the names got mixed up. But I'm still not quite clear on whether Lucifer and Satan have any connections. I mean, were they I don't know, allies or anything like that?
Yes. Well, again, you're coming very much from the religious interpretation of those mythological stories, or they're coming from older stories, but they might make more sense to you if you really want to investigate those ideas. But again, names are much younger, where West has much more stronger pull towards the so-called Luciferian being, but perhaps more for spiritual or philosophical reasons than necessarily the person, but to some degree, there are numerous of those people, right? Prometheus, right? Loki, those different people from different mythologies, and sometimes their names also got mixed in also your pagan mythologies, and then your more monotheistic ideas, right? Many of those pagan gods get lumped into one person. So originally there might be different persons that then later are lumped in the same character. Again, the kitty cats already explained this with the idea of the Jesus person, right?
Okay.
You're all modern, but again, we don't want to get lost in details. Your main question. Who is this person better? Aligned, blah, blah, these ideas? Yes. There are beings you consider angels, right? Others you consider demons, right?
Okay.
Ultimate evil, ultimate good. right? From your own religious ideas, correct?
Right.
Well, the religious ideas more different beings that people back then considered gods and then later considered angels and demons had conflict with each other over humanity, right? They are fought over territory and over property. And some of them lost the war, others won, and those that lost, so to speak, became demons in the mythology. Mainly it was the idea in the Garden Eden, right? Don't eat the fruit, don't get the knowledge. You might learn some things, some ideas that are bad for you, right? Or good for you, the same thing ideas as parents. That's the best metaphor. Father and mother of a child, right? And the mother getting angry at the father for teaching a child how to make fire, right?
Right.
And then the idea of, well, there's more also some selfishness involved, but putting vulgar, the idea is, well, the child might burn itself and should know those things. How the child needs to learn how to handle fire. Conflict like this, simple, right? But there's much more to it.
Okay.
Again, we cannot stretch much further here. We're also aware how much you want to know about those certain topics and how much you're an idea in other areas, or mainly the idea give humans knowledge, yes or no. Main conflict between so-called angels and demons or devils and gods, right? And of course the whole concept of the Nephilim.
The concept of the what?
The Nephilim. The idea you should not fuck those bitches, right?
Okay. Right.
Which again, in your mythology is interpreted as well, you're preaching the gap of certain spiritual more the idea simply military unit being stationed in a foreign country, like for example, fraternization with the enemy, right? Well, not that perfect example saying it was an enemy, it was a creation, so perhaps more the idea of, well, you're breeding certain species and you don't want certain dog breeds to interbreed with other dog breeds because that messes up your own creation, right?
Right.
And then of course the breeder shouldn't necessarily fuck the dog.
Right.
Which is kind of what happened in this case, except there's not that much genetic difference, obviously, as between human and dog, so there could be an offspring, and then the offspring was more like the ones that created them rather than as much differentiation as there was wished by some crew and not so much by others, and that's how you got the whole conflict between angels and so-called fallen angels that then became demons or devil or whatever.
Okay.
They fell because they didn't obey order. It's not like they went to a different spiritual level or whatever. They just were demoted, so to speak.
So, is there any truth at all to the biblical version of Lucifer, where he and 1/3 of the angels launched a rebellion against God himself, but were defeated and kicked out of heaven and became fallen angels?
Well, again, your so-called fallen angel are simply those that get demoted. And your so-called God was not source energy in this case. Either you read a mythology in your mythological, particular Mesopotamian region reinterpreted those stories, since those stories happened in numerous regions, including Atlantis at the time. There are so much convoluted areas there that we can hardly make any sense of what we were trying to wrestle from your own religious teachings. Or yes, there's some truth to it, but the interpretation is completely off.
So who was?
It was mainly about the recreation with humans.
Okay. So who was the so-called god that the rebellion was launched against? I mean, was it just somebody from the Anunnaki like Anu?
Well, your so-called Anunnaki is just also a term from your own planet for those beings, different regions, different cultures, and different names for them. But yes, the person was called Anu in this particular mythology, not the source energy that the rebellion was against, yes. But then again, rather his own son that later became like the Yahweh entity, right?
Okay.
And then his son who likely became the Allah person. Many of your modern monotheist religions simply took one god and said he was the only one. Or she in some matters.
Okay. So what was this so-called heaven that they were kicked out of?
Well, likely it was referring to a region not necessarily Atlantis or Hyperborea, but there was obviously some clustered area where there was a breeding ground.
Okay.
It could also have been a spaceship that was stationed in a region, but mainly it was a certain experimentation field, like a petri dish. Of course, a very elaborate one.
Okay. So just to be clear, Lucifer wasn't either Enki or Enlil, correct?
Again, a lot of identities of your older so-called pagan gods got subsumized under one entity when there were not as much room anymore in heaven, so to speak, for your own mythology. So Lucifer got some attributes from one and some from the other. As well as your Yahweh Jehovah person got some attributes from the one and some from the other.
Okay. So is Satan both light and dark like Lucifer?
Well, lighter and darker, those are words from your own understanding. Obviously, you re-identify what was the dark. However, when you refer to those mythologies, depends who you're asking. Everybody, in one way or the other, has both lighter and darker aspects.
Right, right.
The old element of the one person's freedom fighters, the other person's terrorists. Depends who you're looking at. The one person's demon is the other person's god.
Okay. So
For example, if you have a tribal god of one particular crew, but they're waging war against the other, then for the enemy, they're going to be a demon, right?
Right. So can you share a little bit about the general history of the real Satan? Like, where did he come from? Like, what involvement did he have on Earth? And basically, why is he so popular on Earth? Why do we associate everything evil with him?
Well, likely this comes from the Enki interpretation, right? Those aspects that were translated from there because this person was supposed to give people knowledge. That's being associated with evil. Or some of the actions that the Enlil person, again, we are just using words here you're aware of from the Sumerian mythology, but they have different names in different cultures, and those are also just names that are rather recent compared to original names, or again, names doesn't matter, but we're using those that you are at least familiar with to some degree. Obviously, in Babylon, there are also different names again, etc., etc. And of course, the Great Flood, the eradication, and of course, the main person perpetrating this did not want to take responsibility for it. And later on, everything was more secluded away to the idea of, well, the one god of the one peoples that later became influential to the Christian religion, the Jewish peoples, right? Basically had the idea of, well, there's one god and this other god did all the good things, and the other person is probably doing evil things. Everybody who did something else are gods of other peoples, and they're all demons now, and they all did bad things. And then later on in your so-called Christian religion, they all got more and more subsumized under one person, right? Moloch, Astarte, Baal, etc., right? All different peoples, and later on only one person remained being the ultimate evil, so to speak, and the one person being the ultimate good. Simply oversimplification. So originally numerous people, the same way you associated Jesus person with the ultimate good, when there in reality were numerous people whose deeds were subsumized on one person.
Okay.
Maybe because Christianity spread throughout the entire world. That's perhaps the easiest answer. If another religion spread throughout the entire world, you would use another word for ultimate evil or whatever. Or a different concept of it altogether.
Yeah, I understand, like, associating, all evil with just one person. But, I mean, again, like, who was, like, the real Satan person? Like, a while back you had said, "Greetings, Ryan from Satan," and you said, like, you're in contact with the Satan person. So, I mean, who is this person, really?
Well, that's obviously tongue-in-cheek. The person we're referring to is the individual who most of the person positive attributes from our perspectives get dumped on, right? Which was like the individual you then, from the mythology you bring up, was likely be identical with the Enki individual, right? Or the Prometheus individual, right? But again, different mythologies interpret the same person in different manner. So it's not saying one word from one mythology is necessarily another person from another mythology identically, because there are different time frames, and sometimes one pantheon is already the next generation of another pantheon, because many of those peoples move from one culture to another. Hence, you having culture suddenly emerge in one area of your planet, and then suddenly another area of your planet, where previously there was hardly any culture and people were primitive, right? So, this also applies to their so-called gods that move from one place to another. And what we were referring to was the person that was more or less responsible for the creation of mankind. So you are all more or less the devil's children, so to speak. But again, this is very much a religious interpretation. Many were religious people might get upset, the devil didn't create us, the devil is evil, God created us. But again, those ideas, what you consider God or devil, are not necessarily the ultimate nothingness or the ultimate source of all energy. Those are spiritual concepts we very much work with, since we're more aligned with the idea of negation as a connection to the source, but we don't want to get too mythological here or philosophical rather. And what we're referring to this context is the idea that different beings from the world that you consider extraterrestrials or gods or came together to have the agreement to create humans, and one person was given the task to basically do some genetic engineering to change some hairless monkey or hairy monkeys into hairless monkeys.
Okay. But I mean, I thought the humans on Earth in our modern form were more or less created by the Anunnaki, and you said before that like Satan is a reptilian being. So, I mean, was Satan a member of the Anunnaki?
Well, again, there are numerous beings that energy get lumped on, right? So the person you consider Satan, perhaps now from your mythology, has numerous attributes on different peoples, right? And yes, obviously the person we refer to now would have been a member of the Anunnaki, at least from what you're interpreting now from your own mythology. Then again, there is also a reptilian person that's linked to the individual. There's also a hybrid individual, right? That has been heavily involved with the creation of human species.
Okay.
The problem is always with your so-called names, because you're always need a name for a person, and then the name gets changed over time, or the same name is being used for different entities, and then you get confused. We wish you could send a more clear energy to you, so you know what the individual would feel like, and you would have a clear signature, which would be much easier than using a name. But, well.
Okay.
Again, your so-called modern Satan. Many different ideas have been lumped on that name. For example, the Enki person, then some attributes from the Enlil person talking about the so-called Anunnaki. And then there's also the idea, the concept, the philosophical idea of the ultimate darkness. And then there's also a reptilian entity, or a whole crew of reptiles that have been associated with this particular person, which happened much later.
Okay.
The association happened much later.
So is Satan really red and with horns?
Again, there are numerous individuals attributed to that name. It depends who you're asking. And no, this particular cliche image that you're having is most likely a modern creation. Obviously based on the reptilian form, but it's more of a modern creation.
Okay.